Do you know what a lie is? A lie?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's when you don't tell the truth and you do something bad.
And what happens when you tell a lie?
You get in trouble.
On the night of April 5th, 2010, 5-year-old Patrick Morrissey witnessed something truly horrifying. But instead of holding on to the terror, he would go on to become a hero in the midst of a tragedy. At about 10 p.m. that night, Dr. Joe Morrissey had fallen asleep in the living room while watching TV. His wife Kay was in the crafts room doing some work, and their son Patrick was asleep in the master bedroom. 2 hours later, little Patrick woke up to the sight of chaos. His parents had been tied up, his father had been stabbed, and the house was on fire. Why were his mother and adoptive father tied up? Who stabbed Dr. Morrissey? Why was the house on fire? And more importantly, how did Patrick find himself in the middle of it all?
You're like a hero.
My mom said.
Dr. Joe Morrissey, a science professor at Nova Southeastern University, was the owner of the house he lived in with his family in Plantation, Florida. That fateful night, Kay, his wife, was working in the crafts room when she heard a strange noise. An intruder had cut open the screen of an open window and was making their way into the house. The intruder turned the house upside down in search of valuables to take, but this was no ordinary robbery. After searching the whole house, the intruder held Morrissey and his wife at gunpoint, forced them into a car, then drove them to an ATM, where he made them withdraw $500. Still not done inflicting pain on his victims, the intruder forced them back into the car and drove back to the Morrissey home, where he then proceeded to tie the couple up with zip ties. In a horrifying turn of events, the intruder brutally stabbed Joe Morrissey to death. At this point, it became obvious that this wasn't just a robbery. There was a lot more to it. Before leaving the house, the intruder set fire to the kitchen, leaving Kay and her son to die in the flames. By every indication, the intruder turned killer was unaware that the couple's son, Patrick, was in the house. After the intruder left, Patrick, who had managed to sleep through the incident, was finally awoken, most likely as a result of the commotion or smoke from the fire. Whichever the case, he was greeted by a sight that could leave long-lasting emotional scars on any child.
Let me ask you something. Do you know what a lie is? A lie?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's when you don't tell the truth and you do something bad.
And what happens when you tell a lie?
You get in trouble.
Not only was his father bleeding to death, his mother was tied up and couldn't do anything to save herself. The house was also going up in flames. Surprisingly, the boy was able to take in the situation and act quickly to save his mother. Patrick immediately ran to get a pair of scissors and helped free his mother from the zip ties. Once freed, Kay's motherly instincts kicked in. She picked up her son and fled the burning house. She safely dropped him off at the neighbor's house before calling 911. The next person she called was her older sister, Christina Morrissey, whose house was about 10 minutes away. Christina had just fallen asleep when her mother's call came in. She almost did not answer the phone, but she eventually decided to. Immediately she picked up, she heard her mother crying and asking her to come over to her house. When Christina got close to the house, she noticed that the road was blocked and that there were police cars all around. With fear and panic running through her mind, she immediately exited her vehicle and made her way toward the house on foot. Christina had to weave through police officers to get to her mother, who was standing in the middle of the street with blood all over her. When Christina made it to her mother, the only words the traumatized woman could speak were, "He's gone, he's gone." At this point, Christina had no idea who her mother, Kay, was talking about. Moments later, Kay managed to pull herself together and informed Christina that Joe had been killed that night. As the only two witnesses in a murder case, Kay and Patrick were taken in for questioning. Naturally, detectives decided to speak to Kay first, as the only adult in the situation. After Kay told the detectives everything she could remember from the night, the next step was to hear Patrick's version of the events.
All right, Patrick. Let me ask you something. All right?
Yeah.
Do you know what a lie is? A lie?
Yeah.
What is it?
It's when you don't tell the truth and you do something bad.
And what happens when you tell a lie?
You get in trouble.
I know earlier you said you knew something about some robbers or something.
Yeah.
Like what happened?
Robert attacked our house and my dad died.
Detectives brought in 5-year-old Patrick for questioning. They hoped he would provide them with information that corroborated Kay's version of events. Despite the horrifying experience he had just had, Patrick was able to answer the detectives' questions easily. He told detectives that he had woken up on his own and had seen the intruder put a gun to his parents' heads. What Patrick did not realize at the time was that his adoptive father, Joe, was gone for good. Less than 24 hours after the incident, Detective Kendall, who was in charge of the case, paid a visit to 43-year-old Randy Tundidor at his apartment in a townhouse owned by Joe Morrissey. At the time of his death, Morrissey was in the middle of a legal battle with Tundidor, his tenant. Tundidor, a father of 2, had filed a lawsuit against Morrissey for lack of repairs in the house. According to the lawsuit, Tundidor fell from a broken staircase, which led to him needing a prosthetic limb. Kay told investigators that Tundidor had a history of being a problematic tenant. It was also discovered that 4 days before the tragic incident, Morrissey had sent Tundidor a letter stating that he had defaulted in paying his security deposits. Tundidor was enraged by this letter, believing that Morrissey was trying to evict him from the house. During his visit to Tundidor's apartment, Detective Kendall noted that Tundidor walked with a limp and needed an oxygen mask. There was no way a man in Tundidor's condition could be involved in a case of burglary and murder, or at least so he thought. Although Detective Kendall knew that Tundidor could not have been the person Kay saw that night, there was no other evidence that could lead the investigation further. Since they had hit a dead end, investigators decided to re-listen to the recorded tapes of the interview with Tundidor at his apartment. During the interview, Tundidor stated that his 21-year-old son, Randy Tundidor Jr., had called him that night to ask for money, but he refused to meet his demands. When asked why he didn't give his son the money, Tundidor told the detective that Randy Jr. was a crack addict who was running from the law. With further investigation, detectives discovered that Randy Jr. also had an outstanding warrant for parole violation. Detective Kendall decided to look into Randy Jr., and the first step was to bring him in for questioning. Randy Jr. was surprisingly calm during the interview and repeatedly told detectives that he had no hand in the murder of Joe Morrissey. When Detective Kendall revealed to Randy Jr. that it was his father who had pointed police in his direction, the young man didn't show an iota of shock or surprise. Randy Jr. instead defended his father, saying that he was a good man and would not commit such a crime. He did, however, provide some sort of alibi by saying that he had gotten into a fight with his father and had been at his dad's place of business, Gator Tint, with his friends. At this point, the case began to grow cold, as there was no evidence to prove that Randy Jr. was at the Morrissey house that night. At some point, Kay had identified Randy Jr. in a lineup, and so he was still a person of interest in the case. She had also told Detective Kendall that the intruder had a partner who he was speaking to through a two-way radio. Unfortunately, without any further evidence, the case slowly began to grow cold. After a few days, the case took a shocking turn. Detective Kendall received a call from Randy Tundidor's other son, 19-year-old Sean Tundidor.
Tundidor's father had little to say outside his shop.
He's my son. I love him to death, and I'm going to support him to the end.
Sean told the detective over the phone that he had some information that could help the investigation. What they didn't know was that he was about to crack the case.
I appreciate you calling us like that. You understand you're not under arrest, right? And you're here on your own free will.
During an interview, Sean told the detective that he knew his brother well and that his brother was not capable of murder. However, he dropped a bombshell on the detectives by saying that his father was the culprit. Sean recalled that his father didn't return home until 4 a.m. on the night of the murders, and he also told police that his father and brother were acting strange at around the time that the news of Joe Morrissey's death broke. When the younger son confronted his father about it, Randy Tundidor Jr. responded by saying, "A dead man can't evict me." Now the detectives had seen two different sides of Randy Tundeter through the eyes of his two sons. One son believed his father could not harm anyone, and the other son believed that his father was capable of anything. To further prove himself, Sean asked the detective to give him a recording device. He stated that he was willing to help them gather evidence against his father. The detective agreed to the plan, and Sean returned home with the recording device.
There was a lot of background noise, whether it didn't record properly or there was some sort of obstruction in the recording.
He immediately confronted his father about the case, and it was during this confrontation that Randy spilled some incriminating information. With this recording, Detective Kendall discovered that Randy Sr. had manipulated his son, Randy Jr., into being his accomplice. Randy Jr. was a crack addict, and his father knew exactly how to get him to do his bidding by giving him crack. When detectives searched Randy Tundeter's shop, they discovered a number of suspicious items, including two-way radios, the kind used by the killer in the Morrissey case. With all the evidence found, Randy Tundeter and Randy Jr. were arrested. The trial for the murder of Joe Morrissey began in April 2012. During the trial, prosecutors showed the jury the videotape of Patrick Morrissey's account of the event. The world heard of Patrick's bravery that night and the role he played in saving his mother. As the trial progressed, the prosecution produced a ton of evidence against the Tundeters. However, the court was shocked when prosecutors called Randy Jr. as their key witness to the stand to testify. Randy Jr. had taken a plea deal to testify against his father in exchange for the death sentence being taken off the table. Randy Jr. told the jury that he had been working with his father that night. He confessed that he had kidnapped the Morrisseys and had taken them to the bank while his father remained in the house to watch their son, Patrick. When they returned, Randy Sr. stabbed Joe Morrissey to death before they set the house on fire with the intention of killing Morrissey's wife and son. Randy Sr.'s lawyers argued that Randy Jr. had killed Joe Morrissey because he was a desperate drug addict who would do anything for money. They also argued that Randy Sr. weighed 300 pounds, was on oxygen, and had trouble with his leg, so was not physically fit to commit the crimes. After looking through the evidence provided and careful deliberation, a unanimous verdict was reached. Randy Jr. was sentenced to 40 years in prison for his role in the murder of Joe Morrissey. Randy Sr. was found guilty of arson, kidnapping, armed robbery, attempted murder, and first-degree murder. In the end, he received the death penalty. Justice had been served for the murder of Joe Morrissey. Although he had no idea what was happening at the time, Patrick had lost his dad in a gruesome way, but he will forever remain a hero to his mom. He saved her that night,